Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture in this benighted age, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes or by plugging our RSS feed into your favorite podcatcher. You can find the RSS feed on our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. We're also on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on Spotify, YouTube, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And visit patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod to make a one-time or recurring donation and help me continue to produce smart conversation about books, art, comics, and culture every week at the Virtual Memories Show. I'm back from a weekend in Massachusetts for ReaderCon, the literary fantasy and science fiction festival where I go every year to get in some podcasts, shoot the breeze with old pals, maybe discover some authors or editors I should record with, and generally get away from things. It's also the place where I began this whole running sweat like Patrick Ewing thing last year when I hit the fitness center at the Marriott one Saturday morning and changed my life. I was afraid I wouldn't be able to run this year because of the IT band issues that I've been having, but I did 2 5+ mile runs on the treadmill this weekend. I took a picture of it as this is the scene of the crime where it all started for me. And I also laughed over how much I struggled a year ago, how the day after I did all that running, that Saturday at ReaderCon on Sunday, I couldn't bend my legs to sit down at the table with Gordon Van Gelder over breakfast. Now I have ITB issues, but other than that, the legs themselves are just fine. All of that said, it was kind of a tough weekend for me. I alluded to some issues in the past couple of weeks with the long gap between podcast sessions and how that might not be an advisable thing for me. As it turns out, I've been getting way too interior lately and really sank badly getting to ReaderCon. I was just spiraling in some sort of, I don't want to say depression, but just this whole self-absorbed, crippling thing. Like I say, I think it's a hangover from not having recorded with anyone for 5 weeks, which means apparently I am a conversation vampire, and the lack of pod sessions was wrecking my ability to use empathy to drain guests of their life force. So I'm glad I got back on track this week and managed to suck out the life force of 3 different people, including this week's guest. I met Kate Maruyama a few years ago at ReaderCon with her mom, the legendary writer Kit Reed. Now, Kit is, she described herself as transgenre. For her obituary in 2017, she's referred to as writer of darkly humorous pieces, which doesn't even begin to capture it. But anyway, Kit and I went out to dinner a couple of years ago at ReaderCon, and Kate and I just became fast pals. She and her mom share that in common, that ability to just cut through bullshit and figure out whether somebody's worth talking to. Apparently it doesn't work well enough because they both found me worth talking to, but whatever. Anyway, Kate is based in LA, and after her mother's death in 2017, she couldn't bring herself to come to ReaderCon last year. She was back this time as a judge for the Shirley Jackson Awards and to interview her friend Tananarive Dew during the festival, so we made sure to set up some pod time. Now, Kate is a writer, teacher, activist, and active participant in LA's literary scene. Also, she's good people and tried to help out with my damaged state of mind a little bit before we started recording and in our emails subsequently. Kate's debut novel, it's called Harrowgate, Harrowgate, came out in 2013 from a publisher called 47 North, all one word. Harrowgate is a ghost story about parenthood, motherhood specifically. And as I say in our conversation, Kate can make the insular aspects of domestic life even more creepy than the supernatural aspects of her story, which are plenty creepy in and of themselves. But sometimes it's not the supernatural that freaks you out, but what the domestic life is like for these new parents. I enjoyed Harrogate a lot, even as it affirmed my decision not to have kids. Now, Kate's short fiction has been anthologized a few times. She's got a couple of novels out with agents, editors, etc. You'll find out more about that during the conversation, as well as, well, the activism and everything else that she's up to. As caveats go, not a lot. It was just another Marriott. There was no problem with power surges. I remembered to shut off the air conditioning before we started. Kate had some allergies, so she gets a little hoarse and coughs a few times, but that was it. Here's Kate's bio. Kate Maruyama's novel, Harrogate, was published in 2013 by 47 North. Her short work has appeared in Stone Boat, Arcadia Magazine, Controlled Burn, Salon, and The Rumpus, among other online journals, as well as in 2 anthologies. She teaches at Antioch University, Los Angeles, in their MFA and BA programs, as well as Writing Workshops, Los Angeles. She co-founded and edits the literary website Annotation Nation and has served as a juror for the Bram Stoker Awards and the Shirley Jackson Awards. Kate writes, teaches, cooks, and eats in Los Angeles, where she lives with her family. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Kate Maruyama. Not having kids puts us on different planes when it comes to that stuff. Having children, I believe, you look at generational issues differently than I'm going to.
And I always worry that I'm going to inflict this shit on my kids. So,
And I spared them all that by never having any.
There you go, right?
Although my dog is a little anxiety-ridden, but...
Won't have to contend with it,
Well, since we start off talking about kids and anxiety...
Are we recording?
We are. We'll start at this very moment instead of all the stuff
okay.
about my horrible midlife crisis, which nobody needs to know about. I said that out loud. Your daughter was old enough to read your first novel recently?
Yes, finally.
Which is I'll say harrowing, despite the title Harrogate, ghost story of sorts about motherhood, childbirth, etc. How did she deal with that? How did you deal with, your kid getting introduced to...
I was terrified, and I said, just so you know, there's a spoiler alert, but actually everybody knows by chapter 2, but there's a ghost sex scene, that's rather creepy, and she's like, I can handle it. I think she was actually just surprised that I actually can write. So she's like, this is a good book, Mom. Do people know this is a good book? I believe that Horses Left the Barn. It was published 5 years ago, but thank you. And it was really nice to see that she was engrossed and she kept, stopping and asking me questions and being horrified in exactly the right way. So it was good.
It would be more horrifying if I was a kid reading it, is less the supernatural aspects and more the way you capture the sort of tedium of domesticity and day-to-day life. I'd be more scared by that if I was a kid than I would by
I do have to say, I think she said, oh my God, I'm never having children. So I believe my job was done here.
Well done.
And I had a mentor who was child-free, who was reading it at the time, and he said, I don't understand. Are the things about the kid because the child is dead, or are babies really this way? And I said, well, babies are really this way. And it was based on... definitely my first months with my son and how overwhelming that is. But things like, baby acne and stuff freaked him out.
Yeah, I thought that might be going in the direction of the kid growing into some sort of lizard type thing. Because again, I have no kids.
He took the same cue.
I just said, the kid's going to grow up to be some sort of scaly monster. No, it's just a kid. I do want to point out, I don't know if you've ever seen the bit by Nate Bargatze about the Sixth Sense.
Oh, no.
From a man's perspective, men will watch a movie in which they know there are ghosts, in which the protagonist has been shot at the beginning of the movie, and they are still ready to believe that his wife hasn't spoken to him in over a year than they are that he's a ghost.
Do you know, and it was funny because actually that was a major source of tension when I first saw that movie. I was like, talk to her. Oh my God, this is falling to pieces. So, definitely props to the writer for that, because that was amazing.
But I was in the reading this and having the separate supernatural angle to it. I thought of that moment. Yeah, but no, this is more plausible as the way we try to hold on to the things that are important to us.
It's funny because everybody sort of interprets it differently. My husband's grandmother read it and she's like, oh, this is very good. And she said, you know what? Yeah, grief makes you do that. So she honestly thought it wasn't even supernatural at all, that it was all in his head, which was the only time I'd ever gotten that read.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
What were you aiming for?
I wasn't. I was, I got inside their story and, people always ask if I believe in ghosts and I'm like, I don't disbelieve. And so you can go either way, which is kind of fun. I mean, I think it depends on the reader. I think what you said, you brought completely different things to the story. I think every reader does. So it's whatever they decide it is.
And again, it can work as a form of contraception.
Definitely. Working so far, I may not have grandkids because of this book, and I'll have to make peace with that. But
yeah, they can adopt later when the kids are like 17 or 18.
Right.
But tell me about L.A., because this book is set in New York, and a few of the stories I've read of yours are either New York or L.A., but you're very active within
the lit community, which I didn't know. I actually moved out there to work in film, and I worked in development for a couple of years. I work for Sylvester Stallone's company, which is a rather incongruous thing in my life. And then I quit to write screenplays. So I wrote a novel because it wouldn't be a good screenplay, and shopped around for an agent, couldn't get one. And I found that in order to teach, which is something I really wanted to do, I wanted to teach screenwriting because I actually had 20 years of experience. I had to go to grad school. Didn't want to get a degree in screenwriting because I felt that I had sort of failed in that department. So I took a piece of my novel and applied to a fine arts program and got in, and then wrote Harrogate in there, actually. And so I had no idea that there was an entire literary community in Los Angeles. I had sort of the West Side view of things, the transplant view of things, that it's all about the film industry, which is a completely wrong impression of the city. And as I got to know people, and I got to know people who had been there for generations, the city sort of woke up for me after I'd been there almost 20 years.
Jeez.
So it was amazing. Yeah. And there's a huge history there. Little Tokyo is 100 years old. There were more white people kind of didn't really get to Los Angeles in droves until 1915, 1920. And that's actually when racist laws started happening. So it's really strange to me that there was this thriving multicultural city. There were people working on each other's farms. There were different, there would be Japanese families that owned farms that Mexicalis would work on. A lot of freed slaves because California never got around to inventing slavery or passing any laws. So anybody who naturally went to California was free. There's a wonderful story people should look up, Biddy Mason, who was this amazing woman who had a huge impression on the city because she moved there with a family that owned her, and then I think started to realize that she was free there. And she found out that her quote-unquote owner, because in that state he didn't own her, was going to leave to take her back to where she would be a slave again. And she managed to, again, look it up because I don't have all the details, but she managed to get freed from him. And I'm not certain if she hired a lawyer or what she did. And she ended up being a midwife. She delivered more than 342 babies in Los Angeles. And she also ended up being a landowner. And so there's a huge part of Little Tokyo that she donated to Little Tokyo that was land that she owned. She had a huge impact on the city. There was this enormous rich history that is not shown in movies or television.
Sure.
Because movies and television are often made by transplants who live on the West Side and actually don't get to know the city very well. So that was beautiful to me. And also there was this huge community of poets and writers who have been living in Los Angeles for generations. And there's a huge poetry community there. Everybody is very supportive. There's no ego. And that was really surprising and wonderful to me, coming out of screenwriting, to find this supportive group. All of the readings, the group reading series, there are a number of them. David Rockland's The Roar Shack, which is spelled R-O-A-R, Shack, two different words. And there are reading series that have been going on for generations, like Tuesday Night Cafe, which is a reading series in Little Tokyo. That is the longest running reading series at all in Los Angeles now, the longest running Asian American reading series in the country. Tracy Akemi Kato Kiriyama started it with a friend whose name escapes me a long time ago. And they always have amateurs and people who are established together. And that's sort of the ethos. It's always understood that if you're a newcomer writer, you are welcome. And that's a very different experience from what I felt in other spaces. So I don't want to bash any other cities, but I know there is a city that people believed was the literary center of the world where people are not necessarily supportive of each other and only sort of famous writers get lionized.
Which is why I was just going to ask you how it contrasts with New York from your experiences.
Did I say New York?
Yeah, of all places. But...
Yeah, no, and I have friends who've lived in different spaces. Daniel Handler lives in San Francisco now, and he said in New York he always felt like there was a party for the same 12 writers, and that was all that was going on. And in LA, it seems like there's always something more going on, too. People are usually fundraising. The Rorschach takes place at 826 LA, which offers tutoring to kids in the city.
Eggers thing?
Yeah, Dave Eggers started it in San Francisco. It's named after
826
Valencia, which was the address of the first store. And the one in LA, every time there's a reading there, they raise money for that. It seems as if... it's so funny. I have like too many people in my head, so it's all kind of making me... Writ Large Press is a zero overhead press that is dedicated to publishing people who would not otherwise get out there. And they do sort of desktop publishing, but they also did an event called 90 by 90. I think it was just called 90 by 90 as opposed to 90 by 90 Los Angeles in 2014, where they basically said, we will have 90 events that are free for people to go to all over Los Angeles, or from people all over Los Angeles of different varieties. And they reached out to the community and said, would you like to have a night? That's when I first became friends with Chiwan Choi, who's a very dear friend now. I reached out and I was like, hey, I would love to do a horror night, because I actually didn't know horror writers in Los Angeles, and I thought it'd be a good way to do it. And he was like, absolutely. So I asked Ellen Datlow, and she put me in touch with Lisa Morton, and I got a really nice lineup of readers there. That's actually how I ended up meeting folks from the Horror Writers Association. And so all those 90 nights filled up with people from different facets of life in Los Angeles. And it offered really nice readings. And they ended up, there was like one space they started in, and I didn't even end up like... participating until a month into it. But they ended up at Trax Bar in Union Station in LA, and they formed a partnership, and they said, would you like us to bring a lot of people here every night for 60 days? And they said, sure. It was not doing well at the time. Yeah. Right. And so every night they would have an event down there. And what was beautiful about that was that people would know about the event because of publicity. But I would see, there was this one reading where there were so many people standing there, probably a good 150, listening to someone read. And a traveler, like in the train station, like pulled up with their
luggage
and just was entranced by what was going on. It was kind of magic. It was like cricket in Times Square, situation. So anyway, I got involved with them, and I loved that their idea of writing and who should have access. It was all about spaces and access. It was something that I actually hadn't heard before. It was amazing to me and totally wonderful that literature's for everyone. And literature is, words and spoken word. And they had this one element that they do that's called publish. And it takes sort of the ancient root of the word, which means to make public. And they set up a screen in Union Station and a computer, and people could come and write, and they would project it on the wall. Yes. And so it's like, you are now published. And they have different variations of this. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like I've rambled off into a corner.
But it brings to the point the question, the difference between, for example, L.A. and New York. My L.A. experiences are very scant. It's just 36 hours here, 48 hours there. I come in, I record with a whole bunch of people, I leave. So my L.A. consists of driving around to writers and other creative people. David Bayerwald described L.A. as a town of neighborhoods and said the bus drivers are the only people who know the city. They're the guys who actually go everywhere and see everything. Is that sort of decentralized nature of LA something that that lends itself to that
I think
sense
that
of representation?
it makes me sad because there are people who are known as LA writers who say it is an urban sprawl and everybody is lost and nobody can find their center. The one nice thing was actually the second time 90 by 90 happened, which was the summer of 2017. They created events that happened in different parts of the city, all over the place. And through that, I started realizing, I feel like, and I've made the city sort of accessible for my kids through that. If you know people from different places and you're open to it, it all kind of becomes one city and one thing. I mean, that said, I do have friends on the West Side I haven't seen in a long time because battling traffic for an hour and a half is...
I tried watching Ray Donovan once. I'd been talked off of it by a number of TV critics, but I thought I'd give it a shot. To me, the only thing that I appreciated was the fact that they're just constantly driving. Everybody's in a car all the time because they're in LA, and that's what you have to do.
I think people get localized. So we actually have times where I live in Glendale that's north of downtown. So we can actually get to downtown in 15 minutes without traffic, 25 minutes with. We have sort of a local existence. We have a bus on our corner, and Glendale is very suburban looking. It was a suburb from the 1930s, so a lot of little houses. Mildred Pierce was set there, and actually the first one has scenes that were shot there. We have the Magic Bus on the corner. It takes my kids all the way downtown. So there is connection. Public transportation is definitely getting a little bit better. I think people who are in their cars is when you work far, it's a big drag. But for the most part, I mean, that was the nice thing about 99 by 90 is it kind of unified the city. I mean, we ended up doing an event all the way in Santa Monica. I make it sound very far away.
That's what I'm saying. Everything.
And I know people who have the West Side life think all the way in Hollywood, or they don't. I've known people who say I don't go east of La Brea. I don't consort with those people anymore.
Well, this is when I first started scheduling shows. People were, and you're coming from where? And I'd be leaving some other place.
That you would do the drive.
Yeah, it's like, trust me, all I do is land, get the car, start driving from place to place. Although the last time I went, I actually had to go all the way up to Ventura, like 2 hours plus. Coming in on a red eye, going up to do a podcast with Howard Chaykin, and then coming back into town. But that was this is. I've flown overnight. I've taken some speed. I'll just, did I say that out loud? Sorry. I'll go up and sit with that guy and get a very different Hollywood story than I would get from other people who have interacted with the business.
It's a big, beautiful city, and it's got many hearts and a lot of history. So I definitely do live an East Side life, for sure. But I can get downtown so easily that it's fine.
And, you mentioned your kids probably not going to have children because of Harrogate. Are they pursuing the arts at this point?
Oh, gosh. Yeah. My daughter just came out to me, and it was kind of a big deal. She said, "Mom, I'm a writer." Yes, I know. And, I have a friend who's...
you do adopt horror as a genre, so I guess that's...
I have a friend who was like, "But what shall we do? What will she do if she wants a family? What will she do?" It was all the same questions. So, and my son is a photographer and an artist. I think maybe for a living they won't necessarily pursue that. We'll see where it goes. My daughter wants to go into either psychology or law, because they both... Growing up in this era where they had Obama as president for the first part of their life and then saw how wrong and skewed things went, they actually both want to help people, which is not... I came up in the 80s where it was like I would like to help myself and have a really shiny career and,
shoulder pads and...
Right. Yeah. They actually give a shit, which is really nice. So I'm interested to see where their paths lead. My daughter's writing already impresses me. It's way beyond what I was writing at that time when I was 16, 17. So... Who knows? I feel like there's nothing she can't do. So,
do you see that with teaching? Do kids seem more sophisticated?
It's very funny. I teach grown-ups. So while I teach in a BA program,
I know you've also done some younger,
little kids. I'm sorry. So, repeat the question.
Just the level of sophistication from younger writers.
I have to say the level of people are always complaining about kids being on their phone in this generation. And it's very funny because it's like, we heard our generation doing that and it's almost like people have forgotten. Kids don't care about anything. The kids now have access to all kinds of news and thought. And what I find is they are more in touch with planetary concerns or, governmental concerns and all of that than our generation was. That was presumptuous.
No,
I have a feeling we're contemporaries.
I explained to a kid, a 16-year-old neighbor, I was taking him down to our local high school where he was going to chorale practice. I pointed out where the smoking lounge used to be, where if you could forge a note from your parents as a high school kid, you could smoke next to the student cafeteria. Oh, God. Because the 80s were a very different era.
Yeah.
And he's justifiably worried about climate change, and I didn't downgrade it. I just said, you got to understand, your parents and I grew up thinking the world was going to end at any moment. Like, we just had no idea nuclear annihilation might come.
I was
and
trying
there'd be no
to
warning
explain
or
the
anything
nuclear
like that.
fear to my kids, and what's funny is there probably is more of a threat from more countries now than there were when we were in the 80s, but we honestly believed it was going to happen. Yeah.
And that it was a background psychosis to everything we did that was, you try and ignore it, but even in the process of ignoring it, it's warping you and shaping you. Now we have the much more inexorable awfulness of the future, which again, I don't have kids. So.
Right. No, but definitely I do have one kid who believes in that global warming and this is it. And so his idea is like, help as many people as you can in the circumstance, but be prepared for that apocalypse. Apparently he's in charge. We're moving to the Costco when the zombie apocalypse happens. And we'll put all the meat outside to mask the smell of humanness. And we'll have plenty of supplies to survive on. So I have a future in the Costco when that happens.
Yeah, I was just reading a friend of a friend on Twitter who's apparently doing research on survival maniacs on YouTube, which he had done 10 years earlier. And marveled over the fact that they predicted the collapse pretty much annually for the last 10 years and keep failing. But B, the short-sightedness they have of thinking that just because you've piled up a lot of guns means the next guy hasn't piled up a lot of guns. Now it's really just going to take one shot. It's your ass at that point.
Oh, man. Yeah. And we've been having more earthquakes recently, and the kids actually haven't experienced that. My husband and I were around for the Northridge quake, so we kind of knew that these ones were not the one. But now they've started thinking about the one, the kids, because they were hardly shaken at all through their whole childhood, which was nerve-wracking for us because they say the longer between earthquakes, the more likely you'll have a big one. Yeah. So we were actually kind of relieved by this stress release. But yeah, anyway, it's interesting.
Mm-hmm. I do live on a fault line in New Jersey.
And there's a major one under Manhattan, too.
Sort of. But Manhattan's on bedrock, but this is very near it, the Ramapo fault line, which actually... a portion of it runs to where the nuclear reactor was put up on the Hudson years ago. Yeah,
nice.
Seemingly deliberately by like Joel Silver. They just wanted a horror or apocalyptic movie right there. But where did horror start for you?
Oh, gosh. I didn't know this novel was a horror novel. My fondness for genre was always, that's always been there.
Your mom was described as transgenre to me when I met her,
which is a good term to use. And I think I am as well. I write in a lot of non-genre books. I don't call them literary because it's so annoying that discounts genre. Some of the most beautiful writing I've ever read is in genre. And some of the most...
literary is a class code.
Yeah, it's horseshit. But also, I tell people, well, you haven't read genre growing up. You were taught Fahrenheit 451, Animal Farm. Yeah. Anyway, that's a whole other, that's been covered. But yeah, no, I was always intrigued by dark stuff. There was a book of Native American tales that scared the bejesus out of me when I was little. I read some Poe. I grew up kind of in a Gothic house in a way, and there was always good stuff on the shelves. So I've always been drawn to it. So yeah, this one was just, to me, a love story in which one of the people is dead. Mm-hmm. Again, you find this out chapter 2. It's not a spoiler.
Yeah. So
I was rather frustrated they wouldn't call it a ghost story on the cover because I think it's a good story for people who like ghost stories. Yeah. But the publishers were worried that it was a spoiler. So
for the first 40 pages.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, so I've always been drawn to dark stuff, and even in my non-genre stuff, things get dark. I have no idea why. I think it's just part of that balance of how things can get so dark and ugly in your life, but things are still funny and light, which this book does not have the funny and light part. It has always fascinated me. It seems like a part of humanity. And it's a good place to talk about stuff. I didn't realize I was talking about stuff in this book until after it was done, a couple drafts. And I'm like, no, it was a good way to show the alienation a new mother feels, especially, cut off from her job and everything. And Sarah feels a lot of alienation because of being dead. So yeah, there's a lot to cover.
Yeah, I guess in addition to asking how your kids made out the book, how's your husband?
It was very funny. It was nerve-wracking to have him read it. He used to read stuff before it was published. He would have seen it, so I would be comfortable with it. But here he was lying with the book on the floor, and then he would burst out laughing at certain times. And I'm like, what part are you reading? But I'm sure there was a lot of recognition there. I don't know. He says he liked it.
Okay. There wasn't any sort of looking at you askance or anything?
No, not at all.
Clutching the children as you walk by.
Right. No. We definitely in our conversation go way darker than this book. So that part was good.
When did you decide to become a writer?
Become a writer is
that's
a funny verb.
Yeah.
I actually always wrote. Now, I did have...
When did you decide not to stop?
This is what's funny. So my mother's a writer, and she always was like, don't be a writer, don't be a writer. It's the worst thing. You'll never make a living. And yet she paid me $2 a page to write stories when I was like 5, 6, 7, which is the most I have ever been paid for writing. And so I always wrote. I always felt I wasn't good enough because there was a belief, and I don't know if it was the 70s or my family, in talent as this innate thing, as opposed to practice is something you can learn. And so I always thought I just didn't have it. That said, there was a contest for $5,000, which seemed like it would be really exciting, an Avon novel contest when I was a teenager. And so I was like, I just sat down and wrote a novel that summer. It was called Deja Vu, and it was about a guy wakes up in his car and there's blood on the hood, and he realizes he must have hit a deer or something. And he goes home, and there's a new girl at school who has lost her brother to a hit and run. Oh my God, what could this possibly? Yeah. And of course, it ends up that he was the one who killed her. And what's really funny is I actually saw this, and I won't say which one in case it's a spoiler for people, on a recent Netflix series. This was actually a plot point, and I was like, so it did not win the contest, but I did write it one summer and revised it a summer. And writing about that process, I think, probably helped me get into a better college than I should have been allowed into, given my grades. And but then I stopped with fiction, and when I was in college, I realized that I spoke film. My father taught film at Wesleyan for 40 years. And so before VHS, that dates me, he would...
You didn't say Betamax, for Christ's sake.
Right. Before one could watch movies in one's home of one's choice that weren't coming through on the television, he would bring home prints of the films that he was teaching. And so we would watch 16 millimeter films. And so I had a whole film education. So when I took a film class, when I was a year abroad in England, I realized that this was a language I spoke and something I wanted to do. So I actually pursued screenwriting at that point. And I wrote a screenplay based upon a short story of my mom's. I never thought of myself as sort of a fiction creator, because that was sort of her thing. Yeah. And this was a talent I lacked, clearly, because I did not, like, beautiful sunshine did not stream out of my fingers every day. And again, when I was in my 30s, there was something that wouldn't fit into a screenplay. I wrote dozens of screenplays. There was and I wrote that as a novel. And then I realized I could do fiction, and I really wanted to learn more about it. So the MFA helped there.
And how different was writing screenplays versus prose for you?
It's a whole different animal. I loved screenplays because you're a mad director. And I always I have students who come from screenwriting into novel. And I always say, you are good at some things that a lot of people aren't. You're very good at dialogue, already just because of having to work in this. You're very good at structure. So those strengths were there. But what was funny is I had huge, I don't want to say blind spots because it's pejorative, but
lacunae. That'll make you seem smart about being pejorative.
I had huge lacunae about things like describing characters and inner thought and stuff. So that was a learning curve for me, but it was also fun to play in. So and I adore the screenplay format because what was really nice about screenplays is you can really, if you sit down and work at it every day, write a pretty reasonably good one in 6 to 8 weeks. So that's very satisfying. On the other end of that, your agent or manager goes out with it and it dies within a week. So a little different.
But at least you know quick.
Right?
Yeah.
A quick death. So that's what's nice about fiction is it lasts a little longer, and if it hasn't sold somewhere, it might sell somewhere else. And you can always rewrite it too. So.
And teaching one versus the other?
That's funny because I'm teaching my first proper screenwriting class. I've taught one online right now. And what's nice about that is having worked and not really succeeded at the screenwriting part as far as like sales and things like that. I had a lot of baggage around screenwriting, but now I'm so far removed from it. It's kind of a joy to dive in again and teach my students how to do it. And what's nice is I find myself in articulating how screenwriting works and how you have to show internal thought through action. I think it's going to sharpen skills that I haven't used in a long time that I can bring back to my fiction. Which
I was going to ask, how do they feed into each other?
Right, yeah, they're very different. Yeah, because screenwriting is incredibly visual, and usually the amateur mistake, as someone will say, is she's thinking about this and that and the other, and obviously that can't be communicated through the screen. So
unless you do a terrible idea and use a voiceover.
Yes. Oh God, voiceovers, and it's so funny because I felt really bad. I'm teaching them. I wanted to do Get Out because it's such a solid, awesome screenplay. But the teacher prior to me who had done screenwriting at the university had done that one. So I'm doing Edge of 17 because it's a tight little film, and it's also was affordably made, or I presume, I assume those actors cost money. But I want my students to create something that they feel that, they could maybe go off and make on their own. But it has voiceover. And so me saying, absolutely never use voiceover.
That's like the Elmore Leonard lessons for, or the rules.
Oh, the rules, right, yeah.
He's throwing out
clearly voiceover
bullshit,
works here. I would prefer as a teacher not to read a single voiceover from any of you, that kind of thing. So
one of my favorite movies of recent years, which is probably going to be, sneered at potentially by you.
I don't sneer.
The Nice Guys. Shane Black movie with Ryan Gosling and Russell Crowe.
That was really great.
Yeah, there's a little bit of voiceover from each of them at the very beginning.
Right.
It just gets thrown out. Like there's no continuation of the voiceover. I'm like, why did you have it? Whatever. It's fine.
It's
a
great because it dives into character, and the story is told through character entirely, and you get to know them and you become fond of them.
And my biggest problem, it was actually the first Ryan Gosling movie I'd ever seen. I'd managed to skip everything he'd ever done prior. Now I can't watch anything else he's in because I expect to burst out laughing in almost every other movie he does.
So
I tried watching the Blade Runner thing. I'm like, I can't watch him being serious.
And he's like way serious in that one. Yeah.
Or just dead. It's kind of tough to tell. But yeah, I was just kind of aghast. Like, wow, that guy's actually really talented, but being misused.
Well, and what's funny is the university I teach at is a social justice school, so you have to have that angle. And so we did a section on archetypes like the magical Negro, manic pixie dream girl, sort of throwaway characters that actually demean an entire population. And we talked a little bit about Birth of a Nation. So what was funny is I went on Facebook to ask I wanted to do a thriller too, so they could see how to write action and stuff like that. And I was like, is there a thriller or a heist movie or something that you can recommend that's diversely cast? And people either came up with something that was an all-black cast or pretty much white movies in which anybody who was not white was a horrible criminal. And I realized, because I watch a lot of movies, things have not advanced as far as people might hope. This is still going on. And the funny thing is the one movie that worked, that they came up with, where people are from different backgrounds, but it doesn't matter, this is just who the character is, as opposed to they're talking about race or it's a Colombian drug cartel, was Baby Driver.
I haven't watched it yet, and I'm a big fan of Edgar Wright and the Simon Pegg movies he had done. But yeah, I'll have to.
Yeah, and it's a solid little movie, and again, it's nice. I like it because it's relatively low budget, so it's sort of within. I want to keep my students within the realm of possibility, because if they suddenly write something $60 million, that's not going to help them in the future. Yeah. But yeah, it was very funny to me, but also. I knew when I was working in film in the 90s that things were incredibly monochromatic and male-geared, but I thought things had changed since then.
Have you ever looked at the Coen brothers' body of work?
I have watched many of them.
Have you ever seen Black Person in them?
Oh, right.
I feel pretty. I'm a huge. Miller's Crossing is my all-time favorite movie. And I look back at that body of work. I'm like, they did that Lady Killers knockoff where everybody was black.
And they're from Minnesota, right?
Yeah, there's a black character in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?
Population.
Nothing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Maybe it was fear.
Just start watching the movies and start looking back.
Shit.
No one. It's like Woody Allen, where the only black person he had cast for maybe 20 or 30 years was like a maid in the background of
yeah,
Anna
with
and her
him, I
sisters.
kind of expected with the Coen brothers, I would hope
Yeah, I
for
know.
more.
You would think more, but
Damn.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's and the one guy who has that great line in Raising Arizona when Nicolas Cage is in the group therapy in prison, and black guy just says something like, "I get them menstrual cramps real bad."
Right.
Yeah.
That was it.
That's pretty much it.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's so funny how, we look back at stuff and it doesn't age well because we were so deeply in the system then that we didn't even see it. I mean, I was writing half my screenplays were from the point of views of white dudes.
Yeah.
Because that's just sort of like, it gets ingrained so deeply. And now you look back and
We're in a cocoon. And again, as a man, it's even more exaggerated for me, but it means I can talk over you at any time. Just kidding. But yeah, no, we're in that sort of world where it's just, you don't recognize the privilege,
and people are
etc.
slowly waking up. Yeah, it's interesting. But yeah, that was definitely a wake up call because I'm like, no, I've seen plenty of diversely cast, and no, it would be that it was a buddy film, and one of the guys was white, one of the guys,
Yeah.
But no, diverse was not what was going on. And what's funny is our world is, I mean, at least in cities, the world is super diverse. So it's so strange that nothing on film reflects, but it's like nothing on film really reflects what Los Angeles is really like. That it is a multi-generational, multicultural city. It's 70% not white. And so I'm always telling people, I'm like, it's funny. I don't combat people directly about things because I find that does not work with white folks. But I will speak loudly near them about, gosh, if someone's running a reading in Los Angeles, which is 70% not white, and everybody in that reading is white, they've got a problem, So, yeah, it's strange to me.
I think comics had a few years ago, there was a panel on women in cartooning in which all 5 panelists were
They've
male.
been having a lot of that at Comic-Con, apparently.
Yeah, the same sort of
And
thing.
in a row, like 3 or 4 years in a row. Yeah.
Yeah, there's on my
Let
day
me
job.
explain to you about the ladies.
Right. Well, in my day job, there are scientists who've said we will not go on a panel that does not have, some representation by women because we know we're perpetuating the problem if we're the only guys going up there and speaking, and this is all that people are seeing. So yeah, it's.
I was asked to do a panel at LA Times Festival of Books, and I felt as if I'd been ushered behind the velvet rope, and it was super exciting. And it was about basically fantastic fiction, and Paul Tremblay was on it, and Chuck Wendig, Matt Wallace, and gosh, now I can't remember the fourth. But what was funny is I looked at the list and I'm like, oh Lord, it's all white dudes. So I was like, well, it was funny. I asked a friend, I was like, do I drop out of this? And they said, no, because they'll get another dude in your place. So definitely be there. I was the diversity, which is just ridiculous. I'm as white as the day is long. And so what I did was I wrote to all of them and I said, would you mind if we opened up the panel? Because this is a very large subject. Let's talk about magic realism. Let's talk, talking about writers of color who you've read in the genre. And it was very funny, the response, because a lot of it was like, thank God. There was one guy who was like, I was about to ask my agent if I should drop out and so we were there. And what was nice is we just drew attention to it in the panel. And as Chuck pointed out, not only was it for white dudes, it was for bearded cisgendered, straight white dudes. And they were all absolutely excellent about it. But it was astonishing to me, again, in Los Angeles, which is, 70% not white. So, interesting.
ReaderCon? Mm-hmm. You're back after a couple of years away.
Yeah.
What do you come to the festival for? What do you like here?
I don't know. I think to prove that I could. I came a couple of years back when my mother, who's Kit Reed, was guest of honor, just to sort of fangirl for her. And it was funny because I wouldn't even talk to writers about the fact that I had written a book or anything. I was seeing her friends. Mm-hmm. And the panels were really smart and interesting. So it was a lot of fun. And so I came for, I think, about 3 years with her. And one year I brought my daughter. So it was really fun. And then Mom got sick, so I haven't been in 3 years. And so I came back just to, I knew I had such a good time, but I didn't know if I could do that without her.
How is it so far?
It's been great because I am rooming with a friend from grad school, and I'm interviewing Tananarive Due, who's the guest of honor. So, and she and I work together at Antioch, and so it's taking it into a new form for me, which is nice. But also, I'm seeing all of these old friends of my parents, and that's been really lovely.
Everyone loved your mom.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and a lot of people are talking about my dad too, which is nice. And he passed recently, so. It's been very nice. And it was funny because I kind of was hoping to hate it because it's a very expensive conference for me to come to because I have to fly and get hotel. And I was talking to Brett Cox last night. I was a judge for the Shirley Jacksons this year as a way, that is the biggest joke. I did that so that I could meet a bunch of new people. I am the only juror here. I've been harassing them. It's very far for a lot of people. Chikodali Amalamadu, who's, I think, become a good friend over the course because we were writing each other emails about the books we were reading and stuff, lives in Surrey in England. So it was not going to be a con that she could come to. And Gabino Iglesias and Mike Ford and Linda Rucker lives in Germany. So, yeah. But what I really like about ReaderCon is the panels are really smart, and I go to AWP once a year as well, and that's more for work. It's the Association of Writers and Writing Programs, and there are some great panels there, but it's just a different atmosphere. I feel like the conversations here are really conversations about that are more useful to writers, because it's not actually about writing. It's about how we tackle certain issues in what we write. So the ones that I've gone to have been really great.
And you rarely get this is less of a question and more of a 5-minute statement about my work.
Yeah. Oh.
At least in the panels that I've attended.
God bless the white dude. I just, people are, yeah. And what I like now is people will say statement because they actually want to contribute to the conversation instead of saying, I have a question, and then just going on.
I have a declamation here.
Yeah, exactly.
I will say when I was in the dealer's room yesterday, I saw a copy of Harrogate, which I've been reading on my Kindle. And
thank you for buying a copy of Harrogate.
I stole this one. I'm just kidding. But the dealer was like, Kate's here at the show. I'm like, yes, I know. I'm recording a conversation with her tomorrow. And he was just lit up and then turned me on to a bunch of small books by your mother.
Wonderful.
From
so these are the Wesleyan Press published my mom's collection. It was the same year as Chip Delaney had a book come out from them. They published her collection, The Story Until Now, which was a anthology. And what's funny is I actually worked at Wesleyan Press when I was a teenager. And I came up with someone, Susanna Tamanen, who went on to run the press now. And so she reached out to me, and she had remembered my parents every year would get together and write a Christmas book, and Dad would illustrate and Mom would write it. And she suggested either doing a standalone short story of my mom's as a chapbook or doing Christmas books. And the Christmas books were a more natural choice. I think they're an awesome gift. I guess this will go on after ReaderCon because I wouldn't plug it otherwise. Yeah.
Well, I'll mention them.
But there's this one is Deaths of the Poets. There are 2 others of them. And they were these like hilarious little books that Mom and Dad would make about 150 of from the press of the piratical Primrose, which is what they called their press. And I was actually slave labor on a lot of them. Because
no, that's interns.
That's right. When I was small, sometimes it was just a Xerox, and I would be putting covers on, and then my dad would get a little more high maintenance and print them out, and we would sew the books. Got a few needle holes in my fingers from that. And they would give them to their friends. And so the books were really fabulous over the years. And I think what's nice about them is they can be creative outside of will this sell? So that they're ridiculous, and some of them deeply inappropriate, and some of them absolutely hilarious.
Did you have to gauge that before passing them along to Wesleyan? Like,
there was
actually
this
don't want
one
Mom's
book
name attached
that I was so amused by at the time called The Book of Lobster and Forgetting, which oddly enough makes fun of Alzheimer's, which is the ultimate joke, as my father recently passed away from Alzheimer's. There's karma. Right. Never make fun of some disease you can have in your old age. You will get it. There were ones that were not right. But Deaths of the Poets is good. And the other is The Dog of Truth, which is my parents' extreme racial bias towards Scottish Terriers. And it compares every other dog in the world against a Scottish Terrier. But it's really funny.
And it was gender inclusive because they're referred to as Doberpersons instead of
Doberpersons, yes. Mom was always looking out for everyone. And then the other one is, I think, 30 Polite Things to Say, which is really hilarious. I mean, it's what to do if someone gives you a manuscript, what to do if someone's child starts weeping, there are all sorts of things in there. But it's really nice because those books all sort of have my parents' very playful, loving, and hilarious relationship are kind of evident on the page. So I was absolutely blown away that Susanna wanted to publish these because they're fabulous stocking stuffers. Mm-hmm. Wesleyan University Press, look it up.
How, I'd say, influential was your parents' art? Do you see direct influences of Kit's writing?
Well, what's funny is when I was growing up, we knew Mom was a writer.
I guess that's the other one. How old were you when you actually read your parents'
right.
Mom's work?
So I knew Mom was a writer, but that was not a big deal. I just knew that I couldn't talk to her before 12. She had a babysitter when I was too small to understand that difference. And I remember one time she was down doing laundry, so I was like, here's my chance. And I went down to talk to her, and she explained to me a train of thought and that I had broken it. And I imagined an actual choo-choo train after that. Like, until this day, train of thought is an actual train. But we knew that she wrote, and I was really excited when something would happen, like she'd be on the radio, because that, like, touched my life. But I don't think I was really as conscious of it until I was older. And I read some of her when I was a teenager, but her voice is so evident on the page that I didn't read a lot. And then I started reading her in my 20s, because then you're, like, in your own personhood, and I was going to be a screenwriter, so I have nothing to do with this. So I don't think what it was they did as an art impressed us as much as they encouraged us in any art that we had. If I was into painting, paints would come in the door. If I was for a while, I was going to be we're talking about 80s motivations. I was going to be a costume designer. And so they would support by, buying me the fabric that I needed. And I made my own prom dress. So they just furnished a place where art was encouraged. So that probably had a bigger influence than their actual work. I didn't really, my dad's paintings were everywhere. So, but in his paintings, it's mostly his sense of humor. And so it's very funny because I have a lot of writer friends who grew up in kind of anti-artistic environments, and they're always like deeply covetous of my upbringing, where it's like, please do what you want, free to be you and me. You want to write a novel? Great. And I remember when I finished my novel, they gave me a dinner party, which was funny because I think it was just us. And my dad popped open a bottle of champagne and cheers me and mentioned a line from the book that he really liked. So there was a lot of encouragement. I mean, it was an ideal situation for developing any craft. But yeah, I think that's about it.
Did you interact with did they bring in writer pals or anything? Did you
had a lot of writer friends
or people you should have been freaked out about that you didn't realize you should have been freaked out about?
Well, and also because of Wesleyan, there were speakers. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, I had a few mortifying moments. Ralph Ellison came, and my mom said, "This is the man who wrote The Invisible Man."
Oh, no.
And I said, and I was 11, I said, "Did you know Claude Rains?" So, there were a lot of people in and out, and they would just, my parents would always sort of give them cookies and stuff before they had to go give a speech. Carlos Fuentes came. He was really nice, but it was mortifying for them because it was raining, and I think graduation was at McConaughey Hall at Wesleyan, and he ended up squashing through the mud in his perfectly white suit. And yeah, so there were people I probably should have been more wowed by. But what was nice is retroactively it worked. Frank Capra was a dear friend of my godfather's. My godfather was Paul Horgan, the novelist. So he came over for dinner. And I remember when I met him, I was really excited that he knew Jimmy Stewart. Mm-hmm. I didn't really understand the full scope of how amazing it was to meet this guy. But I ended up doing my senior thesis on him in college, and I was able to go through his papers. And so retroactively, obviously that was a nice moment. But there were a lot of people in and out. And also what was nice was that my mom actually just tended to become friends with people who were good people. So misbehavior by a writer or some egomaniac type things, I was instantly turned off by I think sort of through my upbringing, which is nice because writing in fiction, I had to deal with a lot of the politics when I was writing screenplays, and there was like hierarchies and things involved. But in writing fiction, it's more just nice people to hang out with, which you get the sense of at ReaderCon, right? There are people that I met that first time who turned out that they're enormously famous, but you wouldn't know because they're good people and they're actually just there to talk to you about writing or life or whatever's going on. So I think my folks' bullshit detector was pretty high. So there were nice people coming through our home, which was really good. But I have to say, the students who came through our house were equally as inspiring and wonderful. So it was a really good place to be. There were always smart conversations or funny or goofy, offbeat conversations happening. It was a good place to grow up. I was really lucky.
Do you miss New England at all? In terms of a living situation, or is it just... People are very happy here. And again, I hate place bashing, like I mentioned New York earlier. I really don't. No, missing living somewhere is different than bashing a place.
I think, I think New England's lovely. I absolutely love my upbringing. Although it was a small town, so most of my life, my husband grew up there too. We were like, how do we get out of here? I actually thought I would end up in New York.
Did you know each other growing up?
We met in high school. We were friends.
Okay.
And so that's a long story, but I think he'd rather me not tell it.
No worries. I didn't know if it was one of those bizarre ones where you lived 3 doors away, didn't know each other.
No, my parents were. They lived a mile and a half from each other in St. Petersburg, went to different high schools, had mutual friends, never met. And they met on a blind date when they were in college, away at different colleges. But, New England.
New York.
Yeah, so L.A.,
You're about to say New York. There's something about a...
Oh, no, I just didn't want to bash places. That's why I was saying I didn't mention New York earlier. And I thought, I always envisioned I would grow up and live in New York, but it came time to moving with my boyfriend at the time, who I'm now married to, and he had lived in New York. I said, New York or LA? I want to work in film. And he said, I've done New York. Let's move to Los Angeles. And that's how we ended up there. And what's funny is I've lived there 25 years now, and I feel like I am more Californian, more Angelino. And it's funny coming home and visiting friends here. Socially, it's very different on the East Coast. It's because I think of the strength of Mexican culture. There's an immediacy in California, and people are... in Mexican families, if you go visit, you will get hugged even if it's the first time you got there, because you are family, and a friend of a friend is a good friend. So that part, that easiness is really nice. And we came over for a ReaderCon, and my daughter came, and she said, nobody really talked to me, and that was unusual for her. And I said, they have to get to know you. There's like a little bit of cautiousness, which I understand. I actually was a really kind of antisocial, wouldn't talk to anybody I didn't know person when I went to Los Angeles. My husband grew up half the time in California, so I think there's part of that in him. So I'm more comfortable in the California environment now. It's really interesting. They're just different places.
I was going to ask about activism in general for you. Did that start with LA, or with this recent incarnation of LA?
I think it started with Antioch because of the social justice aspect of the school. It's a low residency program. And I got in again when I turned 40. And I was so terrified. I thought there'd be all 20-year-olds there, but it's actually a huge diversity of age, as well as background, as well as everything. Every aspect of it is a diverse community, which is really nice. But they make you do a field study where they talk about your writing life. And so it's just a different sort of ethos than from other programs. And they make you do a field study where for one semester you take your writing back to your community. So because it's low residency, people come from all over the country. So the understanding is that your field study will be in your community. So I had no idea what to do. And then the sister school to my kids' school, which is in South Central, and they would have events together and exchange things. And our school would send dry goods and stuff down for their Thanksgiving drive, because their Thanksgiving drive was in South Central. They could actually get real help to real people who really needed it. We live in a slightly more affluent part of the city. So I ended up going down there, talking to the middle school teacher and saying, hey, do you need a creative writing teacher? And she said, thank God you're here, because she had a bunch of students, and she did the sentence English teacher part of things, but she was hoping that creative writing would provide a link for them in storytelling and sort of wake up a few things, which was nice. So I went in there thinking, I will find a few. Again, I had come with this wrong-headed notion of there's talent and then there's not. I thought, well, at least there'll be a couple of kids who I can point to good books and, No, these students schooled me. All of them had amazing stories. And what was funny is I was dragging them tooth and nail through sentences. I got my entire pedagogy from them. I was supposed to volunteer for 6 months. I volunteered for 6 years. Mm-hmm. I would go once a week. So we had finished an assignment, and it was like pulling teeth the whole way through. And I was like, you know what? We're close to Halloween. Why don't you guys just be quiet for a while and write a ghost story? It's 100% Latino, the school. Oh my God. All of the stuff that I thought they couldn't do, they were doing, because they all had stories and stories involving their families, and the adjectives rose up naturally because they had to really describe this moment. And the most beautiful stories came out. So the school taught me, it's so funny, I'm supposed to be talking about social justice or that kind of thing. It didn't feel like activism for me. I think I actually got more out of it than they did. But it taught me that you need to meet the writer where they're coming from. And a lot of them, I feel like, I do teach a lot of writing, but I feel like often I'm rehabilitating people who are damaged by people who stopped them from writing. And so for them, and many of them, English was their second language, they were worried they were doing it wrong. And so that completely paralyzed them to be able to tell stories and stuff. And I was like, this isn't going to be graded for, I don't do grammar, I don't do punctuation, this is not what we're doing, just tell me a really good story on paper. And that was able to bridge a gap for a couple of them. And that's actually what I do with grown-up writers, because they're coming from a place, and there's so much. Whenever we start a workshop, people will sit there and say, oh, this isn't good enough, this is really rough, this is a mess, don't even look at this. And I usually have an icebreaker at workshops where I have them tell me their worst critical moment, because that usually unveils the fact that there was a parent telling them they sucked at it, or an English teacher who told them they were doing it wrong, just wrong-headed notions about their own writing. And Pat Schneider's approach, she wrote a book called Writing Alone and with Others. Her approach is everyone can write. She actually worked with women in the Ozarks who didn't have beyond an 8th grade education and got the most beautiful pieces out of them. Because anybody who has a voice and who can talk about something can write, and everyone has a unique story to tell, because all of us, even as boring as we might think, I thought my upbringing was so boring, which is hilarious. I think that's every teenager out there. Feel like they don't have anything to say, but the truth is nobody has experienced the planet the way you do. So anyway, yes, Antioch was, that was my first, I guess, activism. But really the biggest influence on me has been the poets. I have a lot of fiction friends. It's not a distinguishing characteristic in what it is that you write. It's just that my poet friends, maybe because they will never make any money.
Yeah. They're resigned from the beginning. Yeah.
They all seem to have an activist, they're all fiercely passionate about what they believe in, and they also seem to have an activist component in their life. And so the more time I spend with them, the more I realize the less I'm doing. That said, the place where, we're in such hard times now, it's like, where can I help? What benefit can I have? And I'm so grateful that Natasha Dion, who's actually a novelist, she wrote Grace, which is a novel that takes place right after the Emancipation Proclamation, in that wobbly time. And instead of being a slave story, it's actually a story about women at that time and women now. It's really fascinating. She's a lawyer. She has 2 kids. She teaches law. She teaches in an MFA program. And she has another novel coming out from Counterpoint Press, too. She's amazing. But in her spare time...
Don't tell me she has a podcast. I'm really pissed off.
No, definitely. The kind of law that she practices is that she works for the city, and she gets cases where people want their records expunged. And she was realizing that the clients that she would get were people who knew enough to get that far in the system to get to her, or perhaps had lawyers who helped. So she's created a new organization called Redeemed that will pair, and this is so genius on her part, will pair writers with people who have maybe a DUI on their record, and now having a record can get you deported. Yeah. So it's a really serious concern. Or they have something they've done time for 15 years ago, and they've been leading a decent life. Help them craft that narrative. So they'll sit down with writers who've been trained, and also trained for sensitivity, because the idea is not to bring up triggers for folks when they've gone through hard times. And they're doing that through Antioch. It all comes back to Antioch. They have a master's in psychology program, and someone from that program will teach writers. They'll create an affidavit, and she's also got lawyers who will volunteer to get the paperwork through the system, in the hope of when people have been living a really positive life for the past 20 years, they should not be still paying for that crime or having to write that crime on every job application. So I think that's the next thing that I'll do. But it seems like part of life now, which is really nice. I was always volunteering. I don't know.
But in a more effective or coordinated way now? Yeah,
I guess so. But I mean, I volunteered for the Middletown Youth Association for Retarded Citizens. That dates it. Oh, Lord.
Yeah, we had the 80s, man.
Yeah, right? Gotta love those 80s. So I was always doing something, but now it seems part and parcel of things. And what makes me very happy was in the summer of 2017 when there was 90 by 90 again. And that was actually cultural events, 90 days of cultural events. So there were conversations around disability. There were conversations around gentrification, which is a huge monster problem in all cities, and it's really been hitting Los Angeles hard now, all the way through the summer. And I just kept dragging my kids along because it was the only time they would see me. And both of my kids definitely have activism in the blood now, I think, because of the people that they've been around. And it's great because I didn't have to lecture them on it. They heard all these other people, and they're people they admire who are doing good work out there. And they're like, ooh, I want to do that too. I think my daughter only toyed with the idea of being a lawyer when she saw a panel Natasha Dion did with two previously incarcerated women and a woman who ran a halfway house. And she actually, in that one panel saw the prison industrial complex and how damaging it is. So anyway, I think it's more, for me, it was a late thing to come to, but I think it's definitely part of the fiber of my kids.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Terrible final question for any writer. What are you writing?
Oh, yeah, that is a terrible question. Well, it's not a terrible question. I have 3 books actually out to editors now. One is non-genre, and then there's a middle grade non-genre book that's historical fiction, and my latest horror novel, which was fun because I got to exorcise all the demons from my Hollywood days, onto the page. So that's making the rounds now. And then after that, I wrote a novel that took a great chunk out of me that is a portrait of a marriage told through the lens of memory and Alzheimer's, and I play with time and space in it a little bit. And that one was the kind of book where it was so important to me at the time I was writing and feels like such a huge thing that thinking about writing another book right now doesn't seem... I'm just not there yet. I'm going to have to find something I'm equally passionate about. So I've made up my mind I'm just going to do shorts for a while, and I'm working on a pilot with a friend and do other projects for a bit, which is funny because I have been for the past... because that's 4 novels, for the past 10 years, like 8 years, because Harrogate had a long coming out story. Different kind of coming out story. Yeah. I've just been writing novels steadily, so we'll see what comes. I can't not write. I get crabby. My family can't be around me if I'm not writing, so something will come out.
I think before we started recording, the midlife crisis I was referring to probably really crystallized in the 5 weeks between doing episodes of the show, because I was way far ahead for a bunch of weeks, and I basically all of June I did not sit down and record with anybody. And I think that lack of
creativity,
my form of art, which is, I admit, bullshit, nonetheless, got me much more morbid than right. I have any right to.
Yeah, you need that creative flow to it's part of, and it's funny too, because with my kids, I'm trying to convince them not to necessarily do their art for a living, but I said it feeds your soul. It's an important component of your life. So to nurture it, is very important. But that said, Gil, you're a beautiful writer. You should be writing more. I've read you.
Well, I was going through
but I've read you.
I know when I was going through our emails, I realized I'd sent you my 2. We'll just say short stories without putting any adjectives on them. And I realize now I have to cut the half of the last line from my other story and, try and write something else.
Sending it out.
Yeah. There's that whole process of,
I
like
feel
you
like,
said,
because I told you, I rehabilitate people who've been told, think that they're no good.
Yeah, see, that's really the question. What happens when it's solely internal and anxiety-driven, as opposed to having any external? Because every person who's read my stuff, you should be writing more, which is great, except, that means I can no longer trust their opinion
and
about
that's one
anything.
thing that it breaks my heart every time, because there are people I know who are beautiful writers, but their inner don't do it demons are bigger than I can conquer. So all I can say is, and I'll say it now, when you get another one, send it my way. I would love to see it. But it can't be a situation where you push people too hard, because I think people's mental health is more important to me.
Again, I can overcome anything except crippling doubt and self-loathing, but otherwise it's all good.
So whatever you have to do to take care of that part of yourself is the right answer.
We'll figure that out. Kate, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Well, thank you for having me, Gil. It was nice to sit down.
And that was Kate Maruyama. Her first novel is Harrogate. Came out 2013 from 47 North, and it is creepy as all get out in how it depicts domesticity and parenthood so vividly and yet horrifyingly, while also putting a supernatural storyline over it all. So maybe it's not what to expect when you're expecting, but it's an awfully good novel. And you can find out more about Kate and her writing at her website, katermaruyama.wordpress.com. And that's katermaruyama.wordpress.com. She's also on Instagram and Twitter as Kate Maruyama, all one word. Now, after we wrapped, I asked Kate, so, who you been reading? And if you want to hear her answer to that, and get some extra conversation, you'll need to become a supporter of the Virtual Memories show so you can get access to our quarterly bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet. I have yet to get started on the second quarter 2019 episode. I apologize, but depression. But the first quarter 2019 episode features book recommendations and some extra conversation with Jerome Charin, Peter Cooper, Edmund White, Eva Hagberg, Mort Gerberg, James Osland, Joe Chardello, James Sturm, Martin Haglund, Bram Presser, and Nathan Englander. You can support the Virtual Memories show via patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod. And there are all sorts of goals and goodies in place for patrons, including that podcast, a patron-only blog, handwritten show notes for every episode, the secret project that I really need to get back to, but depression, and more. So go to patreon.com/VMSpod and support the art of fine conversation. Now, I recorded this one during ReaderCon up in Quincy, Massachusetts this weekend. I got 2 other sessions in too, which will post in August and October when the guests' respective books come out. Whole weekend probably cost around $500 for the hotel, meals, gas, etc. Now, if you want to help defray some of the costs of the Virtual Memories show, like web hosting, travel, equipment, coffee, or just toss me some money because you think the show is worth it, then visit patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod, and you can make a one-time or recurring donation. A special thanks go out to Nick Bartosik, Buzz Carter, Michael Hacker, Michael Janizik, Fred Kish, Jonathan Kranz, Kevin Katila, Jack Les Camella, Teresa Lewis, Stephen Nadler, Barbara Nessim, Jim Ottaviani, Payne Prophet, Dmitry Samarov, Stephen Solomon, Greg Tanner, Ford Thomas, and Garrett Zecker for going over and above in their support of the Virtual Memories show. We've got the full list of show supporters at chimeraobscura.com/VM. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. Check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018, which I recorded on the way to ReaderCon last year, and you can also listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. That's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. Not sure if I'll be posting a new episode next week, but I'm supposed to record this Thursday with the legendary Milton Glaser. So If that comes off as planned, we're all good for another week, and I get to cross another Mount Rushmore guest off the list. If not, I will finally take that week off I've been threatening to take, or maybe something will come up for this weekend. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.